sometime in the next few decades, humans will leave this planet to live in another world.
That means that some people in our life can be the first Martians. How about that?
We're finding out a lot about how to explore Mars in our station. Over 1,000 people from over 40 countries have actually participated in one crew or another.
It's the grandest adventure I could possibly imagine. That is, for me, the most important reason why we should pursue the establishment of life on Mars.
If we go to Mars in our time, 200 years from now, there'll be new branches of human civilization on Mars.
And we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 9 of Red Planet Live. So it is absolutely my pleasure today and tonight, from my perspective, to welcome Dr. Vandi Verma. So I'll just read a little bit about her. It's a lot. She has done a lot. So, and then of course I'll bring her on the show and then we'll actually get started. So Dr. Vandi Verma is the Chief Engineer of Robotic Operations for Mars 2020 Perseverance and the Deputy Manager for Mobility and Robotic Systems at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She specializes in space robotics, autonomous robots, and robotic operations. She has worked on a number of space robotics and artificial intelligence research and technology development tasks and has designed, developed, and operated rovers on Mars, the Arctic, Antarctica, and the Atacama Desert. She works on new space robotics capabilities from early design through development, testing, and launch to landing and surface operations. As Deputy Manager for Mobility and Robotics, she helps lead about 170 JPL roboticists, place of that right, developing new technology for future missions and working on a variety of JPL robotic missions. For the last 14 years, she has engaged in robotic operations on Mars, driving Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance, operating the robotic arm and sampling system, and helping fly the Mars helicopter. She has designed and programmed flight software that runs on board Curiosity and Perseverance, and simulation software used in Mars operations. She works on autonomous robotic arm positioning and autonomous science targeting for Perseverance. She received her PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon University and has been working at NASA since 2004. So big RPL welcome to Dr. Vandi Verma. Hey, Vandi.
Hi, thank you.
Hey, welcome to the show. So it's awesome to have you here for sure. So one thing I kind of wanted to just sort of jump in is that, so you've been at this for quite some time. Like you've been, so I kind of just wanted to sort of talk to you a bit about, kind of where you started. I'm thinking back, like obviously this must have been something that you're interested in from a robotics perspective, maybe from, maybe a young child. So maybe you can kind of walk me through, or walk the audience through kind of what led you through that journey to kind of, got you involved, where you got interested, how you kind of started out at doing this, and of course, what brought you to NASA.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say, it's been a long time. It actually goes by really fast, even though, you spend so much time working on the missions and it seems like it's a really long time, but there's so much to do. Each day it has so much action that it actually seems to go by pretty fast. So it's interesting to listen to it talked in the number of years that have gone by. So I actually, when I was really young growing up, I grew up in India, and at the time I didn't know that much about robotics. I was very interested in airplanes actually, because I grew up in airfields, but when I came here, I remember, reading about Sojourner, when Sojourner had landed on Mars, and I was just blown away. I just looked at the image, and especially the image of Sojourner right next to Yogi, and I was just like, this is the coolest thing. And I ended up going to graduate school and got my doctorate in robotics, and that was motivated in part. I took actually a class where now a lot of students can engage in robotics, and I think that's a great way to get introduced to it, because I remember spending time. We had these robots that were the Nomad robots at the time. They're sort of little trash cans shaped with sonars, and we had to get them to navigate a maze. And at the end of the class, there was this competition where whichever robot collected the most gold would sort of win it. And I spent so much time on it. I would spend all my spare time, and I realized like this is like fun. This doesn't seem like work. And since then, I've just and the combination of space, which I was always interested in since I was a little child, and robotics is just perfect. I think because robots are so well suited to explore space. We can send them to parts of the solar system that they pave the path for humans to get there. So that's been very interesting. And yeah, I did my thesis work, and I collaborated with NASA. Parts of it were funded through NASA programs. And soon after that, I graduated and started working at NASA, where I've been ever since.
Well, that's awesome. I think, with, sending robots, I mean, it definitely makes sense because, I think they're slightly a little bit more forgiving of the environment than we would be, to go to, especially someplace that's, so foreign, to us that, I mean, we're definitely hoping that, we get to join the robots, here in the near future, which is, what that timeline looks like. I think, we see so many estimates and people putting those numbers out there, whether, we're going to have, boots on Mars, 2030, 2040, there's been lots of numbers thrown out there, but, I think we definitely need to go and, we need to go there and, at least to say hello to the rovers that you put there.
I think, I actually personally, even though I work on robotics, I find the interaction between humans and robots really interesting. And each is really good at something different. There are things humans could do on Mars very easily, where we've had robots work very hard on those challenges, because the sensing that robots have is still not quite there. And also the level of pattern matching that humans can do. Robots are very good at doing that at very specific problems, but we're very good with uncertainty and ambiguity, and being able to, correlate things. You see that when we see for the first time a particular feature, we can kind of map it and think about what we've seen on Earth and sort of, address the problems that way. So I think that, robots will always have a role, even when humans get there. At the same time, each is sort of unique, and I would love to sort of have a time when we're operating robots with humans on Mars.
Oh, that's amazing. I think that's obviously a dream for us Mars enthusiasts and lovers of space. I think it's definitely something that we look to, and it's amazing what we've been able to see in our lifetime. I look at and I think I've said this on a number of shows, when I look at the excitement and what's happening in space, especially with the commercial space industry, and of course the partners that NASA is using in that regard, the excitement out there. I don't think anything's rivaled it since the Apollo missions. I mean, it's absolutely amazing with everything that's happening, and of course with what's just been announced with further missions and further funding coming. It's like it's not slowing down, which is absolutely amazing. We're just seeing so much in our lifetime that's happening today.
It's a very exciting time, and that's actually one of the reasons I like to talk about a lot of this, because I really think if you're interested in space and you're interested in being part of it, there really is a place for everyone to work on this, because there's so many problems that we haven't even started addressing that I'm really excited about the future.
Awesome. So I had a couple talking points here that I kind of wanted just to kind of throw your way, and we'll just kind of go from there and see where the conversation takes us, if that's okay. So obviously we obviously hit a milestone with Perseverance. Obviously right at the Jezero. Actually, how do you say that? Maybe you can tell me. Is it Jezero?
So I say Jezero crater, but you'll find that we have so many variations of the ways in which people would say it, but yeah, that's how I would say it.
Okay, that's how I've been trying to say it. Yeah, it took a while, and I think somebody actually gave one of the, I guess, correct. We'll quote that, correct pronunciations, but I think we know what we're talking about. But honestly,
yes, So our science team does like to pick. We have a very well-defined way in which we define all the quadrants and how we name things. And we always love to joke that the scientists like to pick things that just, it's just hard to pronounce, so that they can sort of, the entire team has a lot of fun, with a new quadrant and the new set of names we'll have. But we are entering a quadrant where the name should be a lot more easy to pronounce.
Oh, good, good. So as I was mentioning, we kind of hit some milestones recently too. So we've, we just celebrated 1 year since the first flight for Ingenuity, and we also and Perseverance, of course, just made a nice long journey heading over to the River Delta. And so it'd be nice to talk about, where we're at, where we're going, and what's going on. Because I think, I mean, there's obviously a lot of publicity and a lot of press around Perseverance. I mean, I think the marketing team and of course all the advocacy groups, everything did a fantastic job of really, raising the bar for, excitement and information for, Mars 2020. And it's just incredible. But maybe if you can kind of talk through for the audience, kind of the journey of, where Perseverance, and obviously, why it's in the crater, what we're doing, and of course the journey to the River Delta, and kind of, where we're going from here.
Right. As you said, it's been a very exciting time. We just this week we celebrated the 1 year anniversary of the first flight of Ingenuity, and we are pulling the plan for Sol 416 for Perseverance. So it's been a really exciting year, and for us, for someone like myself, I work on surface robotics, and the day we landed, I was on the surface side of it. So entry, descent, landing is happening, and you can hear what's happening in the room, and it's a little delayed. You're also watching it on the screen. But for me, really, the excitement kind of goes up a few notches after that video you showed, which is when we actually hit the surface. And for years, many of us would have been working on it, and you look at all the possibilities of where you'll end up. And there's uncertainty with where the entry, descent, and landing will deposit us. And it's been getting a lot better and better. We have 10 times reduced the landing ellipse for Perseverance. Was much smaller than Curiosity, but it was still 8 kilometers. That's a pretty large area. So on landing day, you kind of know exactly where you ended up. And for us, because the landing system had intelligence on board to kind of divert us from if we were headed to a hazard, which we were, but it picked a solution which diverted us further away from the Delta. So when we landed, this was this exciting new place. And for the first time, actually, this is, I've worked on, like you mentioned earlier, I've worked on Spirit and Opportunity and Curiosity, but this was the first time that, as those of us who work in robotic operations, we had 2 robots on Mars that we were simultaneously operating. And even though Ingenuity didn't fly till much later, there's a lot of things you do. There's a slide that sometimes I show where it shows every sol what mechanism we are working with, which we split into in robotic operations 4 main areas, which is driving and operating the robotic arm, the sampling system, and then the helicopter. And we do these interleaved pretty much right from when we've landed. All the time, there's some activity occurring. And so, we landed, and right as we landed, we started doing checkouts, because you've made this really long journey to Mars, gone through entry, descent, and landing, and you want to just make sure that, the wheels are working right, the robotic arm is functioning, and all the instruments are functioning and calibrated. At the same time, Ingenuity was a technology demonstration. At the time, we didn't even know if it could survive once it was separated from the rover, which was initially powering it. So we sort of started looking for the landing site right as we landed. So right after we landed at Octavia Butler, soon after that, we did the checkouts, deployed Ingenuity, had the month-long technology demonstration. And then we really started what was the crater floor campaign. We were at the crater floor, and so the scientists really wanted to study that, characterizing the geology, deploying the instruments. And we collected 8 rock core samples. We skirted all the way around a southern Zeta, and did a toe dip into Zeta, finished the technology demonstration, started using Ingenuity as a scout, where we would be at a particular location, the rovers finishing up a sampling, like we were doing at our first rock core location, Rochette, and then the helicopter would fly ahead and look ahead and see, is that really an interesting place to fly? There were places like raised ridges where we determined, it's not that interesting to go. So it was both interesting to be like, we don't have to drive the rover and then figure out whether or not it's interesting. The helicopter can go to multiple locations. So we finished it fairly quickly. And then about a month ago, we finished the crater floor campaign. And then the next destination that the scientists the science team wanted to get to was the ancient river delta, which is the primary reason we wanted to go to Jezero. You know, if you look at the orbital map, you look at Jezero, there's this delta. It's very conspicuous, and deltas are really have a high probability of harboring signs of ancient life. So we really think that the cores we collect there are going to be very valuable. And this was where it was really where a rover is designed to shine, where we needed to get from where we were to the delta, and it was going to be about 5 kilometers. And so we've spent about the last month just driving. And the amount of progress we've made, you know, in terms of Mars rovers, it's really fast, and we called it the rapid traverse. So we covered about, you know, we covered about 5 kilometers in just the last 31 sols. And this includes the times where we had a lot of DSM outages and other things that happen. So we're not actually driving each of those days, because there's a lot of things that happen with far more frequency than one might imagine, where you're not able to actually communicate with the rover or drive the rover. And so here we are. We just arrived at the delta, and we're very excited because it's quite incredible. And we are starting to now, you know, drive our way around Cape Nookshak and investigating the geology there and getting a sense of where we want to collect those sample cores that we're going to collect here. And then you asked, you know, what's the future here for us? So we are starting to do this traverse, looking at what is interesting. Ingenuity is going to be doing flights to scout out and see what are the paths by which the rover should climb onto the delta, because we're going to be climbing onto the delta, and what's the best path. And so that's what lies ahead for us. And we're going to be spending a lot of time here doing a lot of science. So what's been great with Perseverance really is, you know, what you want to do is spend a lot of time in the locations where you're doing science and rapidly get between those sites by driving really fast. And that's kind of what we've been doing.
Awesome.
And then some of us, you know, who drive the rovers and others might be really excited about the driving part. So even the last month has been a lot of fun because we were just doing drives. So, you know, even though we're spending the month getting somewhere, that getting somewhere has a lot of interesting robotics in it.
Yeah, and I think there's quite a bit of delay too, right? I think for, you know, when you send the commands to the rover, which I'd be amazing if you can even explain how that even works, because I mean, obviously you have Ingenuity. I mean, everything is, you know, we're used to doing things in real time here, and of course, everything that you do, as you know, everything you plan on is not real time. I mean, you plan it real time, but it actually doesn't happen. It happens, what is it, 28 minutes potentially before you actually get an indication back of actually, did it work? Is it going? Is it doing? And you're always behind the clock, right? And so I wonder what that's like. Like what is that really like to have that moment, that pause?
Yeah, so, you know, actually Mars operations is really interesting that way, like you said. So, you know, we do space operations where you're talking in low Earth orbit or to the moon, and the delay can be negligible to, you know, on the order of tens of seconds. With Mars, it depends on the relative position of Earth and Mars. So it can be a few minutes one-way light time signal, but it can be up to 24 minutes, depending on where Earth and Mars are. Early in the mission, when we first land, we're on Mars time, which means that whenever the data comes down from the rover, we start our next planning cycle. So we are sort of working the Martian night shift. The rover has cameras, and the temperature is better for our actuators. So we actually have the rover operate during the Martian day, and then we would operate during the Martian night, creating the plan so that by the time it's day on Mars, we've sent it. But that really means, you know, we're working round the clock or, you know, coming into work sometimes at 6 p.m., going in the morning. And we don't do that for tens of years, because that would make the families of people who work on Mars rovers quite unhappy. So we actually do that for a short period of time in the beginning of the mission, where we're really we've designed this rover, we work with it, but really when you put it on Mars, you are learning all over again, characterizing what it is like in the environment it was designed for. It's sort of like, you know, I talk about like flying an airplane. It's like, you know, on the ground, they're a little bit clumsy, but when they really get into the environment, they're sort of what it was designed for, but you account for a lot of possibilities, and the particular location you get to helps you characterize where you are on that curve of possibilities that you had planned for. So what's interesting is after we finish Mars time, we are now currently in Perseverance operation on Earth time. So we plan, and sometimes we would get the data so late that we don't plan through the night, we plan the next day. So we have all these, there's an entire team, there's a lot of detail that goes into how we plan these solves, because it also depends on when we get time on the Deep Space Network. So because of that, the way we drive is that we plan the entire day's activity. So we don't send a command to Mars and then wait, whether it be tens of minutes for it to come back and then do the next command, because we would make very, very slow progress that way, because the amount we command in what we call a single step is about on the order of a meter or several meters, whereas in a single sol, currently we're driving hundreds of meters. Our longest drive, currently one sol, is 320 meters, but without talking to Earth, we've driven 700 meters with no contact with Earth, connecting the drives together. So what we do is we send what the rover will do for the entire day. This includes the driving, the science activities, any remote science, or any instrument usage we do. And that's it. We plan it all and send it. And once that's done, the rover sends us the commands back. But as a result of, we have to think of all the possibilities. What could happen after the first step? And how should I compensate for it? And so we have a lot of conditional sequencing for those of us, those in programming, in our planning, to say, if the rover has this particular state, we will take this branch, otherwise we'll take another branch. And so that's how we send the plan to the rover, which makes it very interesting, because when you get the data down on Earth, it will typically have done what you intended, but very rarely, almost never, exactly what was the nominal path you simulated, because you can't predict every possible mechanism and result to that precision on Earth. So we account for that uncertainty, and that's what makes it so interesting.
That's awesome. Actually, do you mind if we actually, I'm just going to take a look now, just to mention to the audience, if you have any questions for Vandy, just put them in the chat here. And I'm kind of trying to put my eyes over and see there's been a lot of stuff coming in. So I just want to kind of grab a couple, if that's okay, just to see if we can hit just up some of the audience questions, and maybe we'll get more into the topic points. So let me
Absolutely.
So obviously we'll put this here because I totally agree with this. From Jessica Parker, absolutely, you are a huge inspiration. It's absolutely amazing to have you here. I saw one that came in, I think, just because we did touch on the communication aspect of it. So I believe Jessica also had this question that came up here about some of the common causes for loss of communication. So maybe you can go into a little bit about a couple, so I guess, the common causes.
Right. So, I'll start with saying I'm not a communications expert per se, but there are a lot of, actually, when you think of all, I just started to mention how we actually plan in a very general way. But once we're done planning, we send the commands from Earth direct to the rover, because the commands are pretty compact, and but through the Deep Space Network. And then the rover collects so much data and imagery, especially Perseverance, and the cameras are getting, and the instruments are getting so sophisticated, but the data is so much that we don't want to have the rover spend all that power and time. So we actually transmit them to orbiters around Mars, and those transmitted through the Deep Space Network down to us. Now, these are all these elements in that chain, and each one could have a fault. So communication failures, sometimes the DSN, the DSN has existed for so long, and it's such an invaluable asset, but you have a scheduled time, and a DSN station will go down. If it goes down at the time that you were doing that communication, which is a pretty short window, then you lose that uplink, or you lose that data coming down. And if we lose the data coming down, we can be pretty creative with using very limited data. And we think about this every single day. The order in which we send data, we send the most important data. In fact, we send it after the right initial burst, because sometimes that has the highest risk. So we have all this probability of maximizing what we get. But if you lose your uplink, then you've not sent the next set of commands to Mars. We always have what we call a run out on a rover. So the rover never runs out of what it's going to do because we've thought ahead for the contingency. But that's one cause, is deep space network. Another is the rover is talking to orbiters around Mars. If one of those orbiters happens to have a glitch just at the time that it was going to communicate with us, that can be a cause for a communications failure. Another one is the rover has an omnidirectional antenna, which is how it talks to the orbiters. But when we are talking to it direct to Earth, it uses the high gate antenna, which is directional. So depending on the orientation of the rover at particular times, Earth can be very low in the sky. And if you did an autonomous drive, we account for this all the time. And AutoNav, actually at the end of the drive, knows where the comm headings are and will turn for comm. But say it really had a fault with some mechanism on the rover where it couldn't do the turn, then that hasn't been a common cause, and we haven't had those happen, but that is another thing that could happen, is the rover doesn't have line of sight to Earth, and so it can't get the uplink from Earth. So there's all these various chains, and of course there are dozens of others that are like technology, certain things not making it. There is the craziest one, which actually we did make, but the ace, who's the person who sits in the deep space room, and they are the final person who take the commands we all create and actually uplink them to Mars. I remember the mission manager getting a call from Ace and Curiosity one day. His car had literally gone under a semi as he was on his way to do this job. So, that's highly improbable, but anything can happen. We didn't lose that uplink, and he was totally fine. But, there's all these elements that are us from Earth also making all our checkpoints that results in us getting to the point where we're ready to transmit commands to Mars.
That's amazing. One thing I've always, NASA really doesn't take anything to chance, right? You have to kind of plan for contingencies and backups, and the backups have backups, and you have to always be thinking ahead considerably, especially when you don't have that real-time communication. It's amazing. I think one of our talking points, actually, I think that I was going to go over here is really about the whole area, because one of the areas that you work on is autonomous robotic capabilities. And so I'd like to talk a bit about, I know we kind of have talked a bit about that already, but the capabilities and some of the examples, if you can go maybe into more detail about the capabilities that we have on Perseverance and Curiosity, about like the navigation, and maybe an example would be like how we target interesting rocks on Mars, and maybe some additional capabilities that you might be planning to deploy in the future as well.
Right, absolutely. And like we were saying, because of that time delay with Mars, autonomous capabilities are really valuable. And that really is what allows us to use what the rover is capable of doing and not be limited by decision making on Earth. That really is what we want to do, is right, empower the rover to make the decisions on board. So some of the examples, that I'm involved with is one is, of course, we already talked about autonomous navigation, where generally how we drive is the rover finishes the drive and takes images. We've got wonderful cameras, and it takes images. And once we get those images, we have navigation cameras, we have science cameras. We get them down to Earth, and we create a 3-dimensional mesh. And we use our 3D goggles, and we can look at the terrain in 3D. We also use a lot of simulation tools, and we can plan a directed drive, as we call it, where we're telling the rover where to go. We also use, various techniques to compensate for slips, such as visual odometry. But then beyond the horizon of what we can see, we then have to turn on AutoNav. And previously on previous missions, we would only do it when we had to, because it would really reduce the speed at which we made progress, because AutoNav was much slower than us directing from Earth, just the wheels turning. But we've made a lot of improvements on Perseverance, where it's literally no difference in speed. And so we use it as soon as we've gotten through some local hazards, so we turn on AutoNav, or we built a map. So we use it a lot more. And so that's one capability, is we tell the robot what waypoints we want it to go, because we are still trying to get to a particular destination. But then if it sees a rock that we could from orbital just vaguely see, but as the rover gets close, it's taking images. And beyond the first few steps, it's going to know more while it's driving than we did on Earth when we uplink those commands. And so at that point, once you have the algorithms on board, it's going to be able to skirt more closely to the rocks and make a more optimal path. So we use that. But then now that we're driving hundreds of kilometers in a day, one of the challenges you face is, what if, the most exciting thing on Mars we were going to see is along the drive? And here we are driving along and we miss it. So we have a capability that we're in the process of deploying the rover. It's called Aegis. This is the autonomous technology that allows us to target interesting features. So as the rover is driving, it can, we typically do it after drive right now, but we would also, it's capable of taking a wide angle image, and in that image, it finds the features of interest. And especially in Jezero, where we're driving right now, there's just a lot of sand. So if you just blindly shot the supercam laser, which is, just milliradians, very, 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 the chances of you hitting an actual rock or feature you're interested in is very low. And we've statistically shown that. And then it finds interesting features, and then it'll shoot the laser on it, send the data back without humans having to first get a picture back from Mars, in it find the interesting things, and then tell the rover to shoot it with the laser. It can do it itself. And this capability really enhances the science we have. But as soon as you put an autonomous capability on the rover, there's a lot of interesting problems you have to address. What if we were doing some robotic arm work and the arm had a fault and it failed right in front of the mass cam eye, and now you're shooting the laser on the rover? We wouldn't want to do that. So, we address that, and it's intelligent enough to know that and not do that. So that's another autonomous capability. There's other capability we are in the future going to deploy, where right now we arrive at a location and the instruments we have on the robotic arm that we can place right next to the surface, that's really where science gets interesting, because now you are placing instruments right in the proximity, and the amount you can learn is fairly significant. And certainly when we can get under the surface, like when we abrade the rock or when we drill, for that you have to position the arm, and arms, we have, 100-kilogram arm that's, over 2 meters long. And so there's a lot of slop in robotic mechanisms. So when you want to position it as precisely as the instruments want, there's a lot of uncertainty. So we typically drive and we get that image of that workspace down on Earth. We put it in our tools, and then rover planners very carefully plan the entire choreographed sequence of arm motions to position it. In the future, we're going to have capability where after we drive, the robot is going to build its own map of the workspace, be able to detect if something's hazardous, and position the robotic arm to take images. So there's, a lot more capabilities like this, which will mean now we don't have to wait for humans to do it. Other things we're doing is just, if say one thing didn't work out, say the drive failed, how about if we do some other activity, like take, a science panorama? So we're also working on capability where the rover will be able to replan on board. So there's a lot of exciting things that are to come in the future.
That's awesome. So basically the rover is updatable. Like it's not a static machine that just kind of, it's gone with its instructions and capabilities. You can actually code new features and capabilities into the rover for the life of the robot. And it can, and one thing that I was always curious about as well. Now, I think there's obviously some type of AI on the machine. So as you're saying that you're kind of getting involved and you're helping it get through certain, obstacles and risks, but I assume it's always learning. And how advanced is that AI? Like eventually it's going to be able to do this on its own without actually having a lot of input from humans, right? So I guess there must be some sort of AI mechanism that it's always collecting data, always learning and extrapolating as it's going, right?
So one of the, to the first part of the question, that whether it's updatable. So we certainly can update the flight software. And that's, to me, that's just always so impressive, right? That we've got to have a working spacecraft. And here we are sort of updating its entire operating system. So we do that, but some of the capabilities I mentioned, they're actually already on board the rover. We've just been doing so much stuff that we still are doing new things because we haven't gone around to, even making it through all the capabilities it has. So we can enhance, but some of these
Okay.
capabilities I mentioned are actually already there. And then in terms of the learning, we do have some capabilities for adapting the algorithms. Right now, we're doing it more on the ground, but we have future enhancements will wake where it'll do more learning on board. Right now, that's somewhat limited. We do have a RAD 750 processor that we're running. To me, it's like a 133 megahertz processor. So the computer is actually fairly slow. And the helicopter uses a Snapdragon, and it has far more computing because it's a technology demonstration. We can take more risks than the flagship mission, than the rover does, actually. So we're also looking at ways in which we could use maybe some of the helicopter computing. So there's a lot of ways, but that's what limits some of the AI capabilities. We have to get very clever with the way we use them because the computing is limited.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. You have to use something that has the stability and has been tested and proven that it's reliable. I think, if I remember correctly, I think even the space shuttle was using something like a Pentium 486 based CPU to put that into space, which of course that was probably a decade behind in terms of, but it was very stable chip.
Right. So I think the primary thing, like you said, right, is we need that radiation hardening. And we are starting to get using, this is why we do the tech demos. And I think, the technology demonstrations are how we take a risk with something where there's a lot of uncertainty, like we did with the helicopter. We are putting new processing. We're learning so much with doing that. But we wouldn't want to put the entire Mars sample return mission on that. So yes, like you said, we are starting, human space flight is even more constrained. There you've got lives at risk, even more so than a flagship robotic mission. So each of these, we try to take the risks in a calculated manner. So we're doing them and infusing what we learn into the bigger mission.
Awesome. We just had actually a question that just came in that just caught my eye, and I'm gonna bring that up there because this is such an interesting one. So basically, the Curiosity's wheels have taken a lot of damage. We've seen that actually in some of the shots that have come in recently of Curiosity. It has definitely earned its keep. It has gone a long way. So I think so. This question here is talking about. So how are the wheels on Perseverance holding up, and were there changes for them to actually, to have better durability? I think that's a great question.
Right. But first of all, I have to stop and say, I just love the fact that so many of the people follow these missions. We have an open house and I have people come in. I'm just amazed, like, just, how much people know about the rovers, it's incredible. It's always amazing to me that with whatever information and images we put out, folks are so involved with it. Yeah. So, Curiosity, I was part of the Curiosity mission from the day it landed. And then, of course, I transitioned to Perseverance at some point. But I was on Curiosity when we started to see the wheel wear. And partly they were ventifacts, right? Rocks. In fact, I have, we did a lot of testing later. I have a little grouser sitting right behind me. This is one of the broken grousers from Curiosity test wheel. So
Test wheel, yeah.
I think you're right. So I think what's interesting is we learned something about Mars. We're going there because it's a place that we don't know everything about, right? We have the world's experts in Mars geology, and yet with all the predictions and modeling, the rocks that found these ventifacts, the small rocks, the way they interacted with the wheel caused it to start to show wheel wear rather quickly. Well, in terms of what our expectation was. And that we've mitigated. We put new technology on board called traction control, because part of what we saw through testing we did, we had wheel rigs put in our Mars yard, drove the wheels on different terrains for a very long period of time and tested them. And so we started to see that when the rear wheels are driving, they are pushing the forward wheel, which might have encountered a ventifact sharp rock, into it. And so we developed traction control, which drives the wheels variably and allows it to get over it. So that has really reduced wheel wear. But then, we were like, okay, what should we do with Perseverance? Because we certainly don't want to have the same problem. And so with Perseverance, they really we wanted to study where is it that we can make the maximum improvement. But the wheels that we designed, they're designed out of a single piece of metal, machined out of it. And a single wheel costs tens of thousands of dollars. And we couldn't just be creating these with different patterns and would be super slow as well. So what they did was created wheels that we 3D printed and did testing to show with the real Curiosity wheel and the 3D printed wheel, we were seeing very similar interactions in the way we wanted to test it. So now we knew we had a mechanism by which we could create cheaply dozens of wheels. And so with the different patterns where we changed various Grouser tread patterns, thickness of the wheels, width of the wheels, and tested them, and really rigorously did this over a period of, long period of time, and drove these wheels weeks and months. And what resulted was the design which showed that the wheels need to be slightly thicker. So the Perseverance wheels are thicker, but now the mass has to come from somewhere, as a result as well. Of course, they are heavier as well, but we also determined that a larger radius helped as well. So the wheels on Perseverance are the diameter is bigger than the ones on Curiosity. And then the Grouser pattern. The chevron Grouser pattern in Curiosity was designed because the biggest challenge we've had in a lot of the missions since we've been there with Sojourner is slip. So we're slipping, and the Grouser pattern was meant to cause us to have more traction. At the same time, it caused a stress point. So if you see the wheels in Perseverance, they have a sign, a little bit of a curve. And so they're not straight because you also want to have good traction when you're on side slopes. So that kind of balance of all these changes has really resulted in wheels where we've seen almost no wheel wear to this point, and we've driven on a lot of different terrain. And we've used AutoNav, which tends to be more rough on the wheels because it's not as cognizant as humans are of all these soft constraints, such as wheel wear. So they've done really well so far.
Okay, cool. Another question I was thinking about too. Now, obviously, the rovers, they're collecting samples, of course, with the eventual return to Earth for deep analysis. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have the instrumentation and the capabilities on the rover to really analyze the rocks as well as we need to detect life. Now, is there enough is there enough on the rover to get some indication of life, like something like maybe slightly more obvious than looking like how much life detection can we make with the instrumentation on the rover now, as opposed, like, is there any chance of finding anything currently, or is it definitely going to have to come back the samples to have any kind of indicator?
Right. So we do have, we have really incredible instruments on the rover as well. And partly we do want to make in situ observations, not just of the specific sample we collected, but of the surrounding area, because that both correlated set of observations is what helps us determine the whole story. So in terms of detection, it's amazing how much the science team can tell from little bits of images. I always look at, the picture we have, like the single snapshot of the flyby of Enceladus and all the science that comes with it. So there's a lot you can tell with very little information because they're very good at correlating this information, but definitively telling these things. We have Pixel and Sherlock, and we have Mass Supercam, and we have Mastcam Z, and all these instruments together can give us indications. But part of the reason why this mission is so unique, and for the first time, we're actually going to cache samples that the subsequent missions are going to bring back, because the laboratories we have on Earth and some of the capabilities that we might have that we don't even have now in the future could really unfold the story even more in even more detail than we could possibly do on the surface. So I'm not an expert in that area specifically, but at the same time, I don't think that we would have an absolute definitive answer until we have the samples back on Earth. But we might get very excited about some samples.
That makes sense. So I actually collected some pictures from the NASA site that the rover has taken, and of course taken of itself and taken of the landscape. And I wonder if I was going to bring up a couple for the audience, and maybe and some of them actually are kind of video based as well. So I will save that one. But we have, so I believe, something like this here, and I don't think there's
Right. So this is actually the very first robotic motion we did. I was on that sol, got to have the opportunity to be on the sol where we uplink these commands, where it was the arm unstow. So what you're seeing is the turret rotating and the arm unstowing soon after landing. And actually, this was very exciting to me because some of the software we used to do the collision detection was being used, which I wrote. So this is a very memorable solve for me that you should pick.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, before I go to the next photo, now you also have you say that the code you wrote. Now you actually do have a background in creating and writing the code, but I believe I read in when I was kind of researching, what you've done with Mars and rovers, but I think you also were involved in writing the language itself. Like Perseverance isn't just writing a standard typical language, right? It's actually writing somewhat of a custom programming language that I believe you co-wrote for the rover.
Right. I think you might be referring to a language I used in some research tasks I did, and if you refer at which may or may not be directly used on Perseverance. But we actually, so a lot of the software, we use a lot of different languages. So, whenever we work with Girls Who Code and others, and there's a lot of, students come in like, what programming languages? We use on the ground, on the rover, all kinds of different things. But really, the flight software of the rover is mostly written in C with elements of C++, but that's primarily. But we use, you name it. And we've used it in various aspects of simulation analysis, all different languages. But we do use these meta languages you're talking about, because one of the things is that you can't think about thousands of commands in a single day, no matter how much experience you have, whether you've written it. We have over 64,000 parameters, which are knobs which change how a single command behaves. And, if you look at the commands and the arguments, two commands, there's over 50,000. So this is the scope of what you're dealing with. And a human error could have consequences, even though we simulate everything. So we create abstractions. And so some of these languages we have are languages, and one of them, they're scripting languages that help us create meta commands, which we can change strategically. But when we are what we call tactical, when we are planning what goes on to the rover for this very next uplink, we have to think of a smaller space. So, we do have custom scripting languages that we create both for driving, for various other aspects that, I have been involved with in the past, more so on Curiosity.
Okay, that's awesome. Let me go back here to some of the photos that we have here. So yeah, some are kind of video based and some are, so let me just bring this one up here. I think this is just mapping the location. So there we go.
So this is actually, the Three Forks is the destination. So after we finished the campaign, the crater floor, this is the drive, which we call the Rapid Traverse, which we just completed very recently. And this is where we drove mostly all of this autonomously in large part. So that is the Rapid Traverse drive that we did in the last month.
Awesome. And let me just I'll go for a couple of the videos. So video clips and so we have a couple, actually I have quite a few things here as well. So I'll bring up these photos. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into.
So this is exactly where we landed, the Octavia E. Butler landing site. So that's our landing location, and very close to there where we ended up deploying Ingenuity and the helicopter flew. And you can see on the top left corner of this image is the delta, which is where, the previous drive showed we ended up. So it's a very distinct delta in Jezero crater, which is why this was such a interesting location to go to.
Awesome. I think, if I take a look at, obviously where it's starting and you're looking, it's going over to the delta. Now, obviously there's probably a fair bit of elevation here that's between the terrain as well, right? I mean, obviously, I don't think the topographical map from the orbiter is going to do the justice, right? So I think there's probably, how much elevation do you think is actually between, let's say, the bed and going up to the top?
It depends on where we enter it, but yes, there's, tens of meters. And so I think in different locations. And so that's part of what we're doing right now. We are at Cape Nookshuk and we're going around, both doing science investigation, and we've got a strategic route that we're looking at, but also looking at, is that really the best way to approach getting onto the delta?
Okay, cool. And so this picture that would have been taken by the orbiter, I would assume, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This particular picture is, yes. And it's, we have incredible orbiter images of Mars. That's another thing that's really quite amazing is the orbiters around Mars are really help us, because when we're doing autonomous navigation, it's actually just as interesting for driving purposes to do autonav as it is to do directed driving, because we really need humans even with autonav. There are certain things which are like geometric hazards, rocks and cliffs and boulders that autonav can detect really well. But non-geometric things like sand, it still relies on humans to tell it not to go there. We're characterizing it and seeing how the stereo navigation performs with it, but these orbital images help us tell the rover what places it shouldn't go to, even when it's doing autonomous navigation.
Cool. Let me just bring up. So we have this one here. I believe that's part of the sample collection, I believe, right?
Right. So just, the part of the image you don't see, just at the bottom part, it was Rochat, where you're seeing we drove. This was, actually, I remember the drive, 170, so close to 178, where we came up this gap, and we wanted to sample because actually conjunction was going to happen, Mars conjunction, where the sun gets between Earth and Mars. And you see the location. We wanted to get to the site and take the imaging. And so this was the first 2 sample cores we collected. And this image is the selfie that we took at that location, the rover self-portrait, which it takes with a robotic arm. And it's stitched together with about 60 images taken with a Watson camera at the end of the robotic arm. That's how this image is composed.
Awesome. Is that a 3D camera?
So it is capable of taking video, and it's capable of doing zooming mechanisms, but it's a single camera.
Okay. So pull this one up here as well.
This is a recent autonav drive. On that long drive we saw along getting to the Delta. So this is one of the drives we did along that route. In fact, I think this is Sol 381. So this is, you can see autonav veering around certain things as it's driving. So this isn't part of the autonomous leg.
Yeah, and I think we should probably mention too, because you're using Sol, and for I guess maybe people who are new to this, maybe you can actually explain what you mean by Sol.
That's right. It's you slip into just Mars world is so much. So a Sol is a Martian day, and approximately, you can go into the precision, but it's about 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. And that's why when we're on Mars time, it gets very interesting, because we're going into work 40 minutes later every day. But we refer to a Martian day as a Sol. And so our missions, when we think about and plan, we're planning, everything works in terms of sols, and we think in terms of sols.
Yeah, we have a hard enough time here with with daylight savings time and time zones on Earth, and of course now we were going to another planet which actually has the exact same thing. Well, I don't know if it has daylight savings time, but yeah.
Right. This image, I'm very partial to. So this was the very first self-portrait we took, and almost didn't happen. I was very involved with how we got around to taking this image. So we had just deployed Ingenuity. And after we deploy Ingenuity, it was very critical that we drive away, because if the rover didn't drive off, Ingenuity's solar panels wouldn't have been able to charge and it might not have survived. And we needed to very quickly get to the Vandy location from which we were going to observe Ingenuity as it did its first flight. But we had limited time because we didn't know at the time if Ingenuity's hardware could even survive Martian nights, how many nights. So we wanted to do that first flight quickly. But we really wanted to take the self-portrait, because once we've deployed it, Ingenuity and Perseverance need to be about 45 meters apart, because Ingenuity is a technology demonstration and Perseverance is the flagship mission, and to minimize the risk. Yeah. So this image, we all worked very hard to ensure it would take, because it was very early in the mission. This was taken on Sol 46, and we had just checked out the robotic arm hardware, and we were going to take this image. It's composed of 62 Watson images, and not just that, we wanted to take a video recording. So you actually can see online a a video of how the robotic arm moves in order to take this image. And I can send that to you if you don't already have it. And then we also took sound. So Perseverance has microphones. And for the first time, this was the sol where for the first time we heard the sound of a robotic arm moving on Mars. So it's very special. All of those things came together that this image captures.
That's amazing too. Now, with of course the less dense atmosphere, I'm assuming that the sound actually is probably a lot different than what we would expect from the same mechanism happening here on Earth. I would assume.
You're absolutely right. It's very interesting. The structure of the sound. So if you've been next to the rover, those of us who work, and you've heard it standing next to it, you can recognize it because the patterns are the same, but it sounds very different and some of it actually gets transmitted through the rovers. You don't know how much of it is coming through the air and how much it is through the body of the rover. And so there were certain things that we expected to hear or not. So it's musical at times. There's a little video that I did of how we went about doing the selfie, and in that there are some notes of it. And it almost sounds like a flute in parts. And that's, how and in the test bed, when you hear the robotic arm move, there are parts at which, the motors are changing speed and you really hear that, but it's different on Mars. And that was really interesting to hear it. I hope we do a lot more of the sounds and video as, to help people also experience that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing with what actually happened with that. I should have brought that up earlier about the microphone. It's just amazing that we actually have sounds coming from another planet. And here we go.
It's part of experiencing it. Now we just need to do smell, right? We've got the videos and we've got the sound, and So this was the very first drive we did, and as you can see, you can because the tracks sort of appear out of nowhere. That's where we landed. And we did the drive, and we sort of, just checking out that it's working. It was a very exciting day. Literally, we had a rover. It was moving. So this was the very first drive.
I'm sure that was a very long day. So I suspect some of the days at NASA when you're doing things like this are not your typical 9 to 5 type of day.
So Mars time, particularly, when we land, typically we're trying to get to Mars the shortest route, and it's usually it's the graveyard shifts, the late night shifts right after we land, in the way we've done our rover missions. But really, you have so much adrenaline, it doesn't feel like you don't feel tired.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to, I think you hear this almost like a cliche, but to say, people always say we should do something that we love, right? And obviously you love this immensely, this type of work, and I think that makes it's no longer work anymore. This is just, a love of what you do.
It's true. And, the other part is that each part, when it works, right, there's so many people who worked on it. Somebody designed that hardware. Somebody wrote the software behind it. Somebody helped uplink those sequences. So all of those people come together. And a lot of us, who work on in STEM fields, there's a lot of work you do alone and in parts, but when this comes together, it's also the sharing of that experience with the team. It's a very interesting time when you get to share that with all of the team.
Looks like a nice track photo here.
Yes, this is another one of the AutoNav track photos of us actually making our way to the Delta. And this is, why we have these images. Some of these is we would turn for communications at particular angles, and we're taking images for the next drive, and some of these images overlap with looking back. We are very, very stingy with images we take. And a lot of times, they have to have a function most of the time. So most of the images we take, right, some of them would be super cool to take, but usually we've got so few bits coming down to Earth that it has to be useful for the next drive, for the next science, and that's why we'll take it.
And I think you probably have to be somewhat power conscious too, I would think, right? Because you only have so much power, of course, until the panels charge the batteries again, that you probably want to make every single watt count.
Right, for Ingenuity, that's the case, right? Like it's solar powered. Perseverance has an RTG because of the scale of it. So, but still, it takes lots of naps. People don't always think of that, but we plan naps throughout the day because the amount of power we use, it needs to recharge, and that really needs to be curated a lot. this picture you're seeing, the previous one you saw, Perseverance made its way to Three Forks, to the Delta, going around through the blind terrain. Ingenuity flew right across Seta, and you're seeing the flights Ingenuity took to fly to the Delta to get there. So now, it's accomplished, so much more than the technology demonstration. It's been a very exciting time. We completed 26 flights now, and that's very exciting.
And of course, when it went there, like you're saying, it's a demo. No one even knew if it was going to survive one flight. And of course, now it's basically a member of the team, and it's continuing to provide value every single day.
It's amazing, and just the coordination of it, right? Like we've got a helicopter that only talks to Earth through the rover, and so there's a lot of two moving vehicles, each accomplishing its mission, and it's been a lot of fun to have multiple robots. And this is kind of a future we're heading to. I also work in the robotics section where we are always looking to the future for what we can do for missions to Mars and beyond in the future. And there's multiple robots feature very heavily in some of those scenarios, because there's a lot more you can do when you have multiple robots in terms of not just redundancy, but simultaneously being able to explore areas. And we're seeing that with Perseverance and Ingenuity as well.
Also, I wonder if you could, I had a question for you as well, is that because you're also the deputy manager of the mobility and robotics systems section. And I wonder if you could actually go into maybe a little bit about what that organization does, for developing new technology for future missions and working on the current missions.
Right. So, a lot of the two areas I was talking about, like if people are interested in learning more, because we'll have limited time. So the Mars is mars.jpl.nasa.gov. You can get, or mars.nasa.gov. And then robotics is robotics.jpl.nasa.gov. It covers the robotics organization. It's an incredible organization. I've actually known of it since while I was in grad school. It has people who work. It's I'm always amazed with it as I learn of more and more of the work, which is constant because people are doing new things. So it covers robotics all the way from hardware, so building, the actual robotic mechanisms, the wheeled mechanisms, the limbed mechanisms, aerial vehicles and submersibles, but also most of the surfaces we go to, the interesting aspects, when you're exposed to the surface, you want to get subsurface. So the drilling, the manipulation, the robotic arms. The hardware for those, also the controls and perception. A lot of robotics and just is about perception systems, and also writing some of the software, all of the robotic software, a lot of it that runs on board the rover, and operations of it. So, the spectrum of it, because really, when you are in such a constrained mode as a rover on Mars, what excites me and a lot of us who work in robotics is it's an entire system. You are specializing and working on one aspect, but when you're building the hardware, you really need to think about how it's going to be used. When you're writing the software, you need to think about how it's going to be operated or what the limitations of the hardware are. So it's an organization that has people who understand the robotic system and have depth in a particular area or multiple areas. Also very future looking, as well as working on the current missions. So they are, they'll be, we're working on missions to the moon, to, Europa and Enceladus and beyond. But mostly all of the missions are involved with, getting to a surface, which can involve even the atmosphere and in situ, observing it, sampling it, and performing, science experiments. So that's what a lot of that organization does. And yeah, it's wonderful at JPL that we can be part of missions. Most people are. And we also work in this organization that has more of a bent towards a particular area where people who work on different projects, all of the specialty come together. So it's a wonderful place, and we do a lot of internships. We have it's a great place for people to come to JPL and if they're students or they're postdocs, and we have people from all over the world who work with us.
Awesome. I want to be cognizant of the time. We're a little over an hour, so I wonder if so I just have one final question for my aspect. Then I'll kind of open the floor to you, and if anything you want to kind of close out the show with. But Kind of thinking about people coming into this line of work. So like, a young student, and they want to, serve as a JPL rover, in the years to come. I mean, how do you, what advice do you have for somebody that's looking to get into this line of work, like to come to NASA and JPL and actually be a member of, the rover team and to be part of what you do?
Right. We love for people to be thinking about that, because with all the scope of work we do, we're always looking for new people to join us. So in terms of how to become part of it, like I was mentioning, right, there's so many different parts. And I was just mentioning robotics because that's what I do.
Yeah.
There are scientists, there are people who build the hardware, there are people who do entry, descent, and landing, power systems, thermal, just the spectrum. So if you are interested in most fields, and in fact, we have artists and people who, so it just doesn't have to be STEM fields, even other fields. You can be engaged with our public outreach. We have incredible people who help, everyone learn about these missions. So if you're interested in that, one is finding what aspect of it you're interested in and working in it. Because to work, if you have some particular thing you've already worked on or specialize in, it is easier to connect to what we do because you're bringing something that you've already, worked on or shown interest in the area. We have a website. If you go to the jpl.nasa.gov website, internships and various other, there's jobs posted there that one can apply to. I also encourage people who are like students or young ones getting interested in this there's, FIRST Robotics and various other programs. A lot of people from JPL work with these. That's a great way to get introduced to actually having robots interact with the real world. Iterate with that, going and learning the theory, but applying it. That's kind of what the part of it that's really interesting. And then at universities, we collaborate with universities a lot. The organization, the robotics area that I work with, if that's your area of interest, we work with professors. So you could be at university and you can, have your professor reach out to us or yourself, and we can collaborate with an entire lab. So those are really lots of ways, reaching out to anybody at JPL who you think specifically matches up, applying for the jobs that already are open in internships.
That's amazing. So I think, kind of just to kind of start winding the show down, because I want to be cognizant of your time, and I do appreciate spending, it's been a little over an hour, and it's been amazing for so much education, and you've been so awesome. So I just want to kind of open the floor to you. I mean, if there's anything that you kind of want to discuss or go over in terms of things that maybe you're interested in, or any initiatives, or charities or anything like that. I mean, feel free to mention anything that that means something to you. I'm going to open the floor to you.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing this. I think Mars Society is great. I've been interacting with it. In fact, it's interesting. I did a stint at Mars Desert Research Station while I was awesome. Early on, and so I think it's the engagement and the people who are interested in it that keep the enthusiasm for the work we do. Because really, we're just exploring the solar system. There's so much more to explore, and so that's a very exciting time. And I think there's so many organizations that work with STEM outreach and diversity in those areas that I think are really helping us get more people interested in these areas so we can continue the work. And I think that's really incredible.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I definitely, I really appreciate you taking the time to come, and I've learned a lot, and and I think, it's been just amazing, and I'm absolutely in awe that when I was showing these pictures, you knew exactly what sol that each picture was taken. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So that is amazing. Your retention is just off the charts. I mean, that's just incredible.
No, we just spend a lot of time with them.
No, that's awesome. So I was thinking, typically what I do is I kind of have a customary close out of the show where I kind of show the video that we open the show with. So, but I was thinking what I was going to do today is I'm going to close off the show. Again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the audience, and I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate the audience. Your comments are awesome and amazing. And I'm sorry if we couldn't get to to all of the questions. There were a lot. There's a lot of people watching today, but I really appreciate everything that for everyone watching. I appreciate the questions that came in for Vandy. And like I was saying, I'm going to throw a video from NASA as the show closer that I think everybody, I'm sure many have seen it, but if you're not, you're in for a treat. And again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vandy. And I appreciate you. And I'll just put the video, and then after that, the show will close down. And thank you so much for coming, Vandy.
Thank you,
everybody. Here's the video. Thank you, everybody.
Propulsion, go. EDL phase lead, go.
We have deemed Perseverance ready to execute entry, descent, and landing on her own. Confirmation of entry interface. Perseverance is currently going 5.3 kilometers per second, about 120 kilometers from the surface of Mars. It will start controlling its path to the landing target. Parachute has deployed, and we are seeing significant deceleration. The heat shield has been separated. Perseverance now has radar lock on the ground. The back shell has separated. Skyfin maneuver has started, about 20 meters off the surface.
Tango Delta, nominal.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.